Your recent note caught the attention of our Talia Torella about how the consumer is not okay. Walk us through that.
Well, there is a K-shaped recovery or consumer. The upper end is doing reasonably well, but the question is always kind of what's the change look like? And the change for the upper end consumer is beginning to show signs of stress. Now, whether that's because a lot of the federal workers would fall in that 100,000 plus category, or whether it's something else, what we are seeing is that upper income consumers are increasingly saying that their real incomes are expected to decline over the next year. And their job separation anxiety is actually quite high, particularly relative to kind of lower income cohorts, probably because a lot of the jobs that had been being created were actually kind of, healthcare and kind of other jobs that in many cases tend to be, kind of lower income side of things. And so I think, yes, they're doing fine for now, but there are signs of stress, and ignoring them is something that can lead to trouble.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Drew, I see that anecdotally right now with people who've been looking for jobs, who have been making good money and got laid off, and have been looking for jobs for months at this point. When do we, if we haven't already, how does that then manifest in data? We're not necessarily getting it from the government, but how does that manifest in data that investors can react to, Drew?
Well, I think the one way it will manifest itself is a decline in service sector spending, which we have been seeing. At least through the August numbers, which were the latest ones we had before the shutdown. What tends to happen when you have to worry about things, or when people begin to adjust their lifestyles in ways that shouldn't really be adjusted. And by that, I mean, buying a cup of coffee in the morning is not a decision that should really tax most people's brains, or that they should really think about if they're feeling good about their job prospects or that they have a job. And what we're seeing is people are pulling back on those kinds of purchases. And when that happens, if you're not buying a cup of coffee, you're not going to buy a car. And so we're beginning to see that roll off on the service sector spending side of things. And yes, maybe people are in the upper income tier are still splurging on certain things, or maybe there's a cohort within that upper income cohort that's still splurging on certain things. But the reality of it is, it seems like it's beginning to shift into a kind of a lower growth dynamic. And of course, we can't find any of the data, or we don't have the data to know whether or not that in fact is happening.
Drew, how much of tariffs are a problem, given what we saw today, that there is some leakage in and there may be more coming? It's obviously not what was feared back in April, but how bad is it, Johnny, as Ed McMahon used to say?
And Google that if you don't know what he's talking about, because you should
Drew's
know.
old enough, he'll know.
I know he will.
I do know, unfortunately, because I am old enough. And
I meant that for the rest of the audience out there in our control room.
I do think we're going to see pass-through. I think it's going to happen. It's not going to be a full pass-through, nor is it going to lead to kind of this wage price spiral type inflation story. It's going to be a one-time adjustment, and the Fed should look through it. I was just complaining to you, Mike, though, what about all the credit card surcharges that I'm now paying for? It seems like everything went up by 3% on top of the 3% inflation rate, because every time I pull out my credit card, I have to pay a lot more to kind of just use it. So I think, once again, it's going to be something that people notice and are affected by it. But one of the things that's actually helping people right now is that gas prices are actually extraordinarily low, particularly relative to where they had been. And so we look at gas prices relative to kind of how much you have to work to get there. So how many minutes of your work life does it cost you to buy a gallon of gasoline? And when you look at it that way, it's actually, quite contained and well below where it had been the last couple of years, which is probably helping people continue to spend.